Hello, demigods, monsters, and gods alike. Welcome back to the Olympus Report. We finally reached the end of the original 5 Percy Jackson books. Let's see how Percy Jackson and the Olympians concludes. Here's everything you need to know about Percy Jackson and the Last Olympian. Before we hop into book 5, here's some important reminders. Kronos, Titan Lord, has started a war with the Olympians. Kronos has resurrected in the body of Luke Castellan, son of Hermes. Many minor gods have decided to support Kronos as they feel slighted by the Olympians. Percy Jackson, a demigod son of Poseidon, is supposedly the child of the Great Prophecy. Telling of a demigod of the Big Three either destroying or saving Olympus turned age 16. Percy is 15, turning 16 in a week. Okay, let's see how this story ends. We start book 5 with Percy and Rachel Elizabeth Dare driving down the Atlantic coast in Percy's new stepfather Paul's Prius. Paul has let Percy take the car even though he isn't 16 yet. Paul knows all about Percy's world, including monsters and Greek gods, so he figures he can trust him with a car. Rachel is asking Percy if he's thought about her invitation yet. She's invited Percy to her summer home. Rachel wants Percy to join her as Rachel's dad, who she really doesn't get along with, is giving Rachel a hard time about joining a new all-girls boarding school, Clarion Academy. Rachel thinks her dad won't ask if Percy is there. Percy wants to go but says the timing is just not good right now with the war looming. Rachel wants to ask Percy something else. She asks Percy how she can get Percy to kiss her. And before Percy can do more than just gawk at her like a fish, Charlie Beckendorf, head counselor of the Hephaestus cabin, swoops down and lands on the Prius's hood on a Pegasus, none other than Blackjack. Beckendorf has come to tell Percy that it's time. Reluctantly, Percy leaves with Beckendorf, and before he goes, Rachel tells Percy to think about everything they talked about. When they leave, Beckendorf teases Percy about Rachel and says he promises not to say anything to Annabeth, and Percy says that would be fantastic. Percy and Beckendorf head to the Princess Andromeda, Kronos' monster cruise ship. Percy has Blackjack set them down on the lower deck. When they sit down, Percy notices that Beckendorf is looking at a picture of Selena Beauregard, head counselor of the Aphrodite cabin. Beckendorf and Selena have just recently started going out. Percy assures Beckendorf that they'll make it back to camp and that he'll see her again. And then they go further into the ship. Percy and Beckendorf head to the engine room to sabotage it. But things are taking longer than expected and Percy hears someone coming, so Percy goes to distract them to buy Beckendorf some time. Percy runs through the ship, gaining the attentions of monsters and causing a giant distraction. He fights a giant crab and notices several demigods also on the ship that have now joined Luke's monster army. Percy tries to warn them that if they want to leave, they need to leave the ship now. Percy is almost to the rendezvous point that he has with Beckendorf when his path is blocked by Luke, or more specifically, Kronos. Percy tries to fight Kronos, but he can't bring himself to kill him because he still has Luke's face. Then Ethan Nakamura, demigod son of Nemesis, comes with a captured Beckendorf. Ethan says that their spy told them exactly where Beckendorf would be. Percy thinks they failed, but then catches Beckendorf's eye. Beckendorf motions to his watch, which is the detonator. Percy realizes that Beckendorf tricked Kronos' army. When Beckendorf realized he was going to be captured, he went back to the engine room, acting as if he never set the explosives. Kronos asks if they actually checked the engine room, but Ethan says no. Kronos then tells them to go check the room, and Percy and Beckendorf realize they're running out of time. Beckendorf tells Percy to run, and Percy, realizing what Beckendorf is about to do, refuses to leave him behind. But when Beckendorf goes to press his watch, Percy makes a run for it. He just manages to jump overboard when the ship explodes, with Beckendorf still on board. Percy then hits the ocean and blacks out. Percy then dreams he's on Mount Orpheus, home of the Titans. Two titans are standing around Atlas, who holds up the sky. Two titans, one Croix and one unnamed, are talking about the explosion that just happened. The unnamed one tells Croix to stay there and guard the mountain, and the unnamed one heads east to go help Kronos' army. Percy's dream then shifts, and Percy sees Nico, who tells Percy that things are getting worse, and Percy can't beat Kronos without Nico's plan. Percy is then woken up. When Percy wakes up, he realizes he's in an underwater palace. More specifically, Poseidon's palace. And the person who woke him up is his half-brother Cyclops, Tyson. Percy asks if they found Beckendorf, but Tyson says they didn't. Tyson then takes Percy to see Poseidon, and Percy realizes that the palace is under attack, and Poseidon's forces are just barely holding the monsters back. Percy then sees Poseidon and notices that he looks as if he's aged 40 years. Percy asks how this can be, as gods can appear as whatever they want. But Poseidon says that his appearance reflects the state of his realm, and right now it's not good, as Poseidon is battling Oceanic, the Titan of the sea. Percy then meets Triton, Poseidon's heir and another half-brother of Percy's. Triton asks if Percy's finally come to help. Triton then takes his leaves to go and fight in the front lines. Percy says he will do whatever is needed of him and that he wants to help. Poseidon asks Percy to tell him about his mission, and Poseidon says that while not being able to kill Kronos, Percy did buy their side some time. Percy thinks it was all in vain, but Poseidon says what he did brought New York some time of safety while the Olympians deal with a bigger threat. Percy asks what this threat is, but Poseidon says to ask Chiron when Percy returns to camp. Percy wants to stay and help, but Poseidon insists he needs to head to camp, as it's time for Percy to hear the full Great Prophecy. Percy finally relents, and Tyson says he can go fight in Percy's place, but Poseidon tells him that he is needed in the forges, so Tyson reluctantly heads to the forges. Percy tells Poseidon that he should let Tyson fight, and with that, Percy leaves the palace and heads for Camp Half-Blood. Percy arrives at Camp Half-Blood and heads to the pavilion to tell everyone how his mission went, and unfortunately the bad news about Beckendorf. Percy mentions how if you look at Camp Half-Blood, you wouldn't be able to tell a war's going on. But when you notice how the number of campers have shrunk, that's when you notice just how much they've actually lost. Percy then sees Chiron and Annabeth. Annabeth rushes to hug him, and Percy mentions how his heart stops for just a little bit. Percy then explains how they blew up the ship but weren't able to kill Kronos. Then Selena Beauregard rushes into the pavilion. She asks about Beckendorf, and when she sees the look on everyone's faces, she realizes what has happened, and she breaks down in sobs. Clarice comes over to comfort her and then takes her to the big house for a cup of hot chocolate. Percy then continues to tell them about the rest of his dreams, the spy, and everything that happened at Poseidon's palace. Chiron finally relents and says Percy can hear the full prophecy. Percy and Annabeth go to the attic to receive the prophecy. When they get there, Percy finally asks why the Oracle is a mummy, and Annabeth says it didn't used to be like that. The Oracle of Delphi would pass from maiden to maiden, but suddenly 50 years ago, it just stopped. When Percy asks why is this, Annabeth says she doesn't really know and changes the subject. Then she goes to receive the great prophecy from around the Oracle's neck. Then they head down to the War Council. When Percy gets down the stairs, he notices that the Ares cabin and the Apollo cabin are fighting. When no one sides with Clarice, she gets up and storms away, saying that everyone can fight this war without the Ares cabin. When Percy turns to Annabeth and asks what she's so upset about, Annabeth says that she'll tell Percy later. And then Percy reads the great prophecy. A half-blood of the eldest gods shall reach 16 against all odds, and see the world in endless sleep. The hero's soul cursed blade shall reap. A single choice shall end his days, Olympus to preserve or raise. Everyone then discusses the prophecy and whether or not Percy is going to die. Chiron says that prophecies often have double meanings. Percy says that he has accepted it, that if he needs to die, he will. Chiron then changes the subject to the issue of the spy at Camp Half-Blood. Everyone then argues on who it could be, and people start accusing each other. But Selena puts a stop to this when she chastises everyone, saying Beckendorf wouldn't want them arguing. Chiron then decides to tell Percy about the threat that Poseidon was talking about. Chiron didn't want to tell Percy up until this point because he wanted Percy to enjoy his summer with his mortal friends. At this line, Annabeth looks away, and Percy realizes that Annabeth knows that he's been hanging out with Rachel Elizabeth Dare. But before Percy can say anything, Chiron shows him a news report. Mount St. Helens can't stop erupting, and Percy deduces that Typhon, the god's biggest threat, has escaped his imprisonment. The gods are currently trying to stop Typhon as he makes his way to New York to destroy Mount Olympus. As the gods battle him, natural disasters are breaking out across the country. Percy mentions how this leaves no one to guard Olympus, but Chiron says that if Typhon makes it to New York, it won't matter. Percy points out that this is a trap. With Olympus unguarded, Kronos can just march his army in there. Connor Stoll says it's okay since Percy destroyed the Princess Andromeda. The army is destroyed. At this, Percy and Annabeth look at each other, thinking the same thing. What if the Princess Andromeda was a decoy? But before they can say anything, Chiron says that's enough for now and dismisses the meeting. That night, Percy dreams of Rachel Elizabeth Dare, and Rachel is throwing darts at Percy's picture. Rachel's dad comes in and interrupts her and deduces that Percy is not coming on vacation with them. Rachel's dad then asks Rachel if she's still having nightmares, and Rachel says not to worry about it. Rachel's dad then leaves, and Rachel uncovers several paintings that she's done of said nightmares. One is of Mount Olympus surrounded by storms, and another is of young Luke Castellan, who she's never seen. And then Percy wakes up the next morning. The next morning, Percy and Annabeth go about their chores together, so they run cabin inspections. They see Selena, who is still extremely upset, and when they get to the Ares and Apollo cabin, Percy notices that they are still fighting. Annabeth reveals about what. Both the Apollo and the Ares cabin found a flying chariot during a raid, and they both think they have a right to it. Annabeth and Percy both agree that this fighting is ridiculous, and then they talk about what's truly important right now: friends and family, not chariots. Finally, Annabeth says that they haven't gotten any word from Grover, and Percy hasn't heard anything through his empathy link either. But things don't stay pleasant between them for long. Soon they're fighting about Rachel Elizabeth Dare, and Annabeth storms off. Later on, they hold a burial for Beckendorf, and Percy tries to convince Clarice to fight with them in the war, but this just makes her angrier. The next day, Percy goes to see Mrs. O'Leary. As Percy is scratching her belly, all of a sudden she takes off into the forest. When Percy catches up with her, he finds Nico D'Angelo, Juniper, and the Council of Cloven Elders. Juniper is pleading for them to send out someone to look for Grover, as she knows Grover is in trouble, but the council refuses to help a traitor. Percy then talks with Nico, who shadow traveled to camp. As a son of Hades, Nico is able to travel between shadows, but it's super exhausting. Percy asks Nico if he has any new leads about finding things out about Nico's family, and Nico says no, but he may soon. Nico then tells Percy that they are running out of time, and if Percy wants to stay alive and beat Kronos, he needs to follow Nico's plan. Percy finally agrees and asks where they should start. Nico tells Percy that they need to retrace the steps of Luke to learn more about him. Nico tells Percy that Mrs. O'Leary will help Percy shadow travel, and with that, Percy hops on Mrs. O'Leary, and the two, plus Nico, slip into the cold shadows, heading for the house of May Castellan, Luke's mother. When they arrive, Mrs. O'Leary takes a nap, so Percy and a drowsy Nico knock on the door of the Castellan home. When May Castellan opens the door, Percy realizes that something is not quite right with Luke's mom. In fact, she's pretty insane. She keeps thinking Nico and Percy are Luke and talks to them about Luke and then thinks they're Luke again. May's kitchen is covered in Kool-Aid, burnt cookies, and peanut butter sandwiches, apparently Luke's favorite. She keeps making Luke lunch, thinking one day he'll come home to her. Despite her craziness, Percy and Nico find out a couple things. May Castellan was like Rachel Elizabeth Dare. She could see through the mist and was offered a job at camp. All she says is it didn't quite work out. She also reveals that Luke came to her recently seeking her blessing before he headed to some sort of river. May's eyes then turn green and she starts speaking what sounds like a prophecy, something involving Luke's fate. Afterwards, her eyes return to normal and she has no memory of this episode. With that, Percy and Nico leave. Percy can't help but feel just a tad bit of sympathy for Luke. Growing up with a crazy mother and no father, no wonder why he felt abandoned. When Percy and Nico find Mrs. O'Leary, she's sleeping near a fire, and around the fire is a young girl of about 8 years old. She's revealed to be Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Hestia feeds Nico and Percy, and then the trio talk. Hestia asks if Percy will follow through in the path of Luke, and Nico says it's the only way to defeat Kronos. And with that, Hestia sends Percy and Nico home. Percy and Nico end up in Percy's mom's apartment, and Paul, despite knowing that Percy is a demigod, is still very shocked to see Mrs. O'Leary. Percy explains everything that's going on and then asks for his mom's blessing before continuing with Nico's plan. Sally is extremely hesitant but eventually gives Percy her blessing after Paul talks some sense into her. Sally does ask Percy to send her some sort of signal at the end of the war to show that he's okay and made it out alive. She says perhaps something blue, and Percy agrees. Before Percy leaves, he takes his mom's cell phone and calls Annabeth and leaves a message. Then, Percy and Nico need to head to the underworld. So they once again shadow travel to Central Park, where Nico says there's a secret passageway. When they get there, Nico explains that this entrance is known as the Door of Orpheus, and they need music to get it open. Before they can do that, Percy senses something. His empathy link with Grover is tingling. Percy thinks that Grover is near. Percy concentrates really hard and can sense that Grover is somewhere in the park asleep. So Percy, using the link, gets him to wake up. Once Grover is awake, he comes and meets Percy and Nico. Grover is shocked to learn that he has been missing for 2 whole months, but then remembers that someone put him to sleep. Grover was following someone in a black suit, and whenever this person passed a human, they would pass out. When Grover confronted the person, he put Grover to sleep. This person was the god Orpheus, god of dreams. Nico says Grover is lucky to have even woken up. They conclude that Orpheus must be working for Kronos, and Kronos is preparing for his attack on Mount Olympus. Percy asks if Grover can use his reed pipes to open the underworld door. Grover does, and Nico and Percy head into the underworld, and Grover heads back to camp, planning on having the nature spirits help him track Orpheus down. Once inside, Percy asks where to go, and Nico says they need to first make a visit inside the palace gates. When they get through the gates, Percy realizes something. Nico tricked Percy. Hades, Nico's father, promised Nico information on Nico's mother in exchange for Percy. So the Furies come and take Percy away to the god of the underworld. When they get to Hades, there are some other guests there as well. Persephone, god of spring and Hades' wife, as well as Persephone's mother, Demeter, goddess of nature. Hades, as promised, tells Nico information on his mother, Maria D'Angelo. When Nico and Bianca were born, it was just before World War II. It was a bad time for Hades' children. So Zeus attacked them and killed Maria D'Angelo. So Hades put Nico and Bianca in the Lotus Hotel and Casino to protect them. When Nico asks why they were removed from the Lotus Hotel and Casino now and by who, it's revealed that Hades removed them. And why? Well, Hades basically didn't want to be left out. Both Zeus and Poseidon had broken their oath and had children that the great prophecy could be about, so Hades wanted his fair share as well. Hades wants one of his kids to finally have a chance at being a hero. Hades says Bianca would have been better, but Nico will have to do. Percy yells at Hades and says that Hades should be helping the other gods with the war, and if Kronos wins, he won't let Hades continue to run the underworld. Hades says I guess Percy will never find out, as he'll be sitting out the war in Hades' dungeon. Nico is angry at this, as this was not part of the deal. Hades was supposed to let Percy go at the end. Hades then sends Nico to his room and tells Percy he wouldn't have been able to stop Kronos anyway, as the trap will soon be sprung. Percy accuses Hades of sabotaging the gods, and then Percy is taken to a cell. Percy falls asleep for the time being and dreams of Rachel Elizabeth Dare, who is still receiving nightmares in the form of some kind of prophecies, almost like she's seeing the future. And then Percy's dream shifts to Typhon, who the gods are no closer to stopping, and he's made it as far as St. Louis. And then Percy is woken up by Nico. Percy is super angry at Nico, and why would Percy trust him? And Nico says because he has no choice. So Nico puts all the guards to sleep and they escape the palace. When they get outside, they meet up with Mrs. O'Leary, and Mrs. O'Leary takes them to the River Styx. When our heroes get to the River Styx, Nico's plan is revealed. He wants Percy to bathe in the River Styx like Achilles once did and become invulnerable. Nico says Percy needs to concentrate really hard before he jumps into the river or he'll burn to death. They then see the spirit of Achilles, who tells Percy not to do this, but if he's gonna do it anyway, he has to concentrate on his mortal life. What links him to being mortal, and then link that to one point in his body. One point that is his weak point, much like Achilles' heel. If Percy succeeds, he will be impenetrable. But if this spot is struck, he will die instantly. Percy realizes that this is what Luke must have done and how he was able to house a Titan in his body. If Percy wants to be strong enough to defeat him, he needs to brave the river. When Percy jumps in, he says it's like jumping into boiling acid, but 50 times more painful. Percy also realizes that for the first time, he can't breathe underwater. Percy thinks of his mother and Tyson, but realizes he's losing the battle until he hears a familiar voice and a tugging in the center of his lower back. The voice he realizes is Annabeth, and she's calling for him. He sees her reaching out for him, so Percy reaches out and takes her hand, and then Percy breaks the surface. Before they can figure out if Percy is okay, Hades and his army has caught up with them. Percy, suddenly filled with rage, charges into the army alone. Bullets seem to be bouncing off of him, and he turns the entire army to dust. And the next thing Percy knows, he has the god of the underworld by his collar and riptide against his throat. And Hades actually seems pretty scared. Percy says he'll allow Hades to live, but first he wants to know what the trap is. But Hades just disappears. Percy tells Nico to go and try and figure out what Hades knows and maybe possibly get Hades on their side. Nico agrees, so with that, Percy hops on Mrs. O'Leary and sets off to find Luke to get this war started. Percy exits the underworld in Manhattan and uses his mom's cell phone to call Annabeth. Annabeth says, "Where the heck have you been, Seaweed Brain? We're all worried." Percy says that he'll explain later and asks if Annabeth got his message. Annabeth says yes, the whole camp is on their way to meet Percy. But because of this, the camp is virtually undefended. Percy says not to worry about it for right now and then hangs up the call. Percy then meets up with everyone at the Empire State Building, aka Mount Olympus. When Percy gets there, he counts 40 Half-Bloods. Not many to fight a war, but the most he's ever seen in one place. Percy is a little nervous around Annabeth after his vision of her in the River Styx, but quickly snaps out of it as there's bigger issues at hand. Percy tells everyone that something really bad is going to happen tonight, and they need to get a council with Zeus to convince him and the gods to come back and protect Mount Olympus. So with that, 40 Half-Bloods head up the Empire State Building to the 600th floor. Annabeth mentions how Percy seems different, and Percy says he'll tell her later. On the way to the throne room, they pass Hera's throne, and Annabeth mentions how she hates her and reveals that since last summer, Hera has been causing problems for Annabeth. For example, Hera keeps sending her sacred animal, cows, to leave presents for Annabeth that she keeps stepping in, if you know what I mean. When they get to the throne room, they're greeted by some old friends, Bessie, the Orpheus Taurus, and Hestia. Hestia welcomes them and says that Percy is indeed now carrying the curse of Achilles. But even though Percy has gained much, he must still be very careful. Hestia then shows Percy a flashback vision of Thalia, Luke, and Annabeth when they were on the run. Hestia says that Percy needs to better understand Luke if Percy is to beat him. The first vision that Hestia shows Percy is of Thalia and Luke when they find a very young and scared Annabeth. Luke promises to always protect her and to consider her family. He then gives her a dagger, the dagger that Annabeth still uses to this day, and says that the blade will protect her. The vision then shifts to a couple months later and they're outside May Castellan's home. They're in desperate need of supplies, or otherwise Luke would have never come back here. But before Luke can go inside, he's confronted by his father Hermes, who says Luke should not have come. Percy then snaps out of the vision and collapses, but before he can hit the floor, Annabeth catches him. Percy is really shooken up by these images, but decides to handle their mission first. Percy starts to explain to Hestia why they are there, but Percy is interrupted by Hermes and his two snakes, George and Martha. Percy tells Hermes that they need to speak to Zeus, and Hermes says he'll deliver the message, as he is the god of delivery. Percy tells the rest of the Half-Bloods to do a sweep of Olympus and then meet back here in 30 minutes. Percy tells Hermes that this is a trap. Kronos wants Olympus defenseless so he can attack. Annabeth says surely her mother Athena must realize this. Hermes says that Athena is the only reason Hermes came back to Olympus. Athena suspects the trap, but Zeus won't hear of it. Percy then accuses Zeus of being blind, and this angers Hermes. Hermes says that Zeus has not left Olympus defenseless. There's no way for Kronos to get here, as the only way would be for Kronos to march through the city. And Hermes doesn't think Kronos would ever do that. Percy, however, is not too sure, but Hermes assures Percy that their biggest threat is Typhon. Hermes does bring a message from Athena. Athena says that the demigods must hold Olympus without the gods' help. Athena also sent a message for Annabeth, telling her to try Plan 23. Hermes then goes to leave, but before he does, Annabeth apologizes to Hermes and says how sorry she is about Luke. And this causes Hermes to explode in anger, claiming that everything that happened to Luke is Annabeth's fault. Annabeth is the only one that could have saved him, and Annabeth failed. This makes Percy extremely angry, and Percy says it's Hermes' fault. He abandoned his son. And Hermes says, you have no idea what I sacrificed, and then Hermes leaves. Percy tries to comfort Annabeth. Percy then reveals where he's been, visiting May Castellan and bathing in the river Styx. Percy also tells her Luke did this as well, and Annabeth feels sympathy for Luke, and this angers Percy, as Annabeth seems to only think about Luke. So Percy changes the subject and brings up the message from Athena, Plan 23. Annabeth explains it's one of Daedalus's plans, that she discovered on the laptop that Daedalus left to her, and it's very dangerous. But before she can explain more, they are interrupted by Connor Stoll, who tells them they need to see this. When Percy rushes out into the city, he doesn't notice anything at first. In fact, it's really quiet, which is strange for a city. And then he realizes that the entire city of New York has been put to sleep by Orpheus. Percy sends Mrs. O'Leary to go look for Grover, as they're going to need his help. Annabeth then pulls out what looks like a shield, but is actually a screen, something she had Beckendorf make for her this summer based off of one of Daedalus' designs. It can show you anyone as long as they're under either the sun or the moon. What they see is not good. Kronos' army is attacking Manhattan from pretty much every entrance point, and some are even coming by boats. But Percy is determined not to let them take Manhattan. Percy splits up the forces. Apollo cabin to the Williamsburg Bridge, Demeter to the Brooklyn Tunnel, Hermes to the Manhattan Bridge, Hephaestus to the Holland Tunnel, Aphrodite to the Queens Tunnel. Percy is about to order Clarice to the 59th Street Bridge when he realizes she's not there, so Annabeth volunteers the Athena cabin. Percy says he will handle the boats, and Annabeth volunteers to go with him. Someone calls out, "No detours," and everyone starts snickering, which makes Percy and Annabeth blush. Percy tells everyone to keep in contact with cell phones, and if they don't have one, to take one from a sleeping mortal. Before everyone leaves, someone reminds Percy that he forgot the Lincoln Tunnel. Percy curses, but thankfully, Thalia and the Hunters of Artemis show up, and they say they will handle the Lincoln Tunnel. Percy and Annabeth hop on a scooter and race for the river. helping the occasional baby carriage from rolling away on their way there. Annabeth then makes Percy stop at a statue. Annabeth says it's an automaton, and Plan 23 is to activate it. This worries Percy since their experience with automatons are not good, but Annabeth said it should be okay because she has Daedalus's notes. When they wake the statue, thankfully it doesn't try to kill them, and the automaton leaves to go continue waking up other automatons to hopefully help fight in the battles. Then they get to the river and Percy jumps in. Percy, in order to get the attention of the river gods, starts insulting the East River and the Hudson. This eventually gets their attention, but not in a good way. Now they want to kill Percy. Percy asks the polluted river gods to help sink Kronos' army, but why should they? And Percy says that he can pay them. Percy then pulls out the sand dollar that Poseidon gave him last year at his birthday party. The river gods start arguing over who gets it, so Percy splits it in half. Each half starts spewing clean water, and he gives one to the East River and one to the Hudson River. And in exchange, they agree to sink the boats. When Percy resurfaces, he tells Annabeth it was a success. And she says good, because the Apollo cabin needs backup, because the Minotaur just showed up. Percy whistles, and a couple minutes later, Blackjack swoops down to take Percy and Annabeth to the Williamsburg Bridge. Percy has Blackjack set them down with the Apollo cabin, who are just barely holding back Hellhound Stracine and the Minotaur. When the Apollo cabin sees that this is their only reinforcements, they think they're doomed. Annabeth asks where their flying chariot is, but Michael Yu says that they let Clarice have it as it wasn't worth fighting about anymore. But apparently Clarice said it was too late and still refused to help them fight. Percy says they need to charge forward and he'll take charge. Annabeth wants to come with, but Percy says it's too dangerous. Before Percy goes, he asks Annabeth if he can have a kiss for good luck, as it's kind of tradition by this point. But instead of smacking him, which Percy expected, Annabeth just says, "Come back alive and we'll see, Seaweed Brain." Percy, with his invulnerability, is able to beat the Minotaur and take out the monster, enough to where they start retreating. But then Kronos himself shows up with his demigod reinforcements. Percy tries only to wound them, as he can't bring himself to kill fellow demigods. Percy is holding his own when he feels a chill go through him. When he turns to see, Annabeth has taken a dagger for him. A dagger that was headed right for the small of Percy's back, his Achilles heel, the spot that would kill him instantly. Percy sees that the demigod that struck Annabeth is Ethan Nakamura, and Percy smashes Ethan in the helmet with the butt of Riptide, and Ethan staggers back. But Ethan witnessed the exchange and now knows of Percy's weakness. Percy calls Blackjack and then fights with Kronos. He's able to hold Kronos back enough for the other campers to get Annabeth to safety. However, Percy is losing the battle. Michael Yu calls to Percy and tells him the bridge is weak. So Percy jams Riptide into the bridge, channeling the power of the river, and the middle of the bridge collapses, forcing Kronos and his army to retreat to Brooklyn for now. When Percy turns back, Michael Yu is missing, and then Percy receives a phone call from Selena Beauregard, telling Percy to get to the Plaza Hotel quickly with a healer from the Apollo cabin, as things are not looking good for Annabeth. Percy grabs Will Solis of the Apollo cabin and tells the rest of the cabin to continue looking for Michael, and then him and Will race for the Plaza Hotel. On the way to the Plaza, Percy notices that many statues are missing and Plan 23 must be working. When Percy gets to the Plaza Hotel, he realizes that demigods and hunters have taken it over as a base of operations. When Percy sees Annabeth, it doesn't look good. The dagger she was struck with was laced with poison, and her cut is seeping green. Will says that the poison hasn't moved past her shoulder yet, and she should be fine, so he gets to work. When he's finished, he says he's gonna need more supplies, so Connor and Travis Stoll head off to the Duane Reade to gather supplies. But Percy tells them not to steal them and to leave money on the counter. Percy also gets an update that all of Kronos' army has retreated for the time being. Selena Beauregard is helping tend to Annabeth, and she's ashamed of herself as she can't do more, being not much of a fighter. Percy tells her not to be too hard on herself and that she's doing plenty. That's when Selena gets the idea to race back to camp to try and convince Clarice to come and help them. Percy and Annabeth then have a tender moment where Percy asks how Annabeth knew that Percy was in danger, because if she didn't take that dagger, Percy would be dead right now. Annabeth says she just sensed that Percy was in danger, she just knew. Percy then shows Annabeth where his Achilles spot is, and afterwards the pair continue holding hands. Annabeth then tells Percy something she's been keeping from him. Last summer, Luke came to visit her in San Francisco. Luke said Kronos was using him and Luke didn't want to be involved anymore. He asked Annabeth to run away with him, but Annabeth didn't trust him. If she only would have trusted or killed him, maybe Kronos wouldn't have been revived. Percy says she can't think like that and not to let what Hermes said get in her head. But before they can talk more, a scout comes to tell Percy that Mrs. O'Leary returned with Grover. Grover tells Percy that the nature spirits and satyrs are helping fight in the battle, but Kronos' army just continues to grow. And Grover says that there are other titans on Kronos' side besides just Kronos. Percy then thinks of the titan he dreamed about. Thalia, who just entered the room, says there's not much they can do right now and tells Percy to go rest. Percy dreams of Nico in the underworld. Nico is trying to summon his mother, but instead Bianca appears. She tells Nico that he is forbidden from speaking to their mother. But Nico refuses to listen as he wants to know what Hades is hiding, and then he dispels Bianca's spirit and tries again. Then Percy's dream shifts. Percy has a vision of the past, the day Nico and Bianca's mother was killed. Maria, the two kids, and Hades are living in Washington, D.C., and Hades is trying to convince Maria to come to the underworld with him as Zeus is angry. As the great prophecy has just been spoken, and Zeus wants Nico and Bianca dead because he's afraid of them. Then Hades senses the attack too late. Zeus blows up the hotel that they're staying in. Hades is able to protect the children, but Maria D'Angelo dies. Hades is then visited by the then Oracle of Delphi who spoke the great prophecy. Hades blames the Oracle for Maria's death and places a curse on the Oracle. He says that as long as his children are considered outcasts, there will never be another human host for the Oracle of Delphi. Percy then dreams of Rachel, who figured something out and knows Percy is in danger. She makes a deal with her dad. Rachel will go to Clarion Academy if he takes her back to New York now. Percy is then woken up by Thalia saying that they have a visitor, a titan, under the flag of truce. Prometheus has come to talk to Percy, and with Prometheus is Ethan Nakamura. Prometheus wants to make a deal with Percy. If Percy surrenders Mount Olympus to Kronos, Kronos won't touch the city of New York. Prometheus, the titan of foresight, says that Percy should take this deal as there's no way that Percy could possibly win. Percy refuses this, and Prometheus says that perhaps if he saw the truth about Luke, Percy would understand. Then Prometheus sends Percy into a flashback. Percy is back in front of Luke's house when Hermes confronted Luke. Luke blames Hermes for abandoning him, saying Hermes didn't even care that Luke was scared and alone his whole life. Hermes simply says that he cannot interfere in Luke's path, and this just makes Luke angrier. Hermes tells Luke to go to camp and that he loves him, but Luke demands to know the truth about his mother and that if Hermes actually loved him, he would tell Luke. But Hermes cannot, and then May Castellan comes outside and spews once again what sounds like a prophecy that only Hermes understands. Hermes knew what would happen to Luke in the future, but he did nothing about it, and then Percy snaps out of the vision. Prometheus tells Percy that the gods don't care about their children, so why should you help them? Percy thinks about all the terrible things the gods have done. Zeus trying to kill Nico and Bianca because he was scared of a prophecy, Hades cursing the Oracle for just doing her job, Hermes not helping Luke even though he knew his fate. But yet, Percy does not surrender, and then Prometheus gives Percy a jar that Pandora once opened. The only remaining spirit in the jar is Hope. Prometheus tells Percy that if he releases Hope, Prometheus will know that Percy has surrendered. Then Prometheus leaves. Percy then tells Thalia about his vision and says how Hermes knew everything that would happen to Luke but did nothing. Thalia says that maybe Prometheus manipulated the vision, but Percy says either way, it's still not right. Thalia then tells Percy that he can't have sympathy for Luke. Luke made the decisions that he made, and no one could have stopped him. Thalia then brings up how she's worried about Annabeth and when Annabeth will eventually have to face Luke, as Annabeth has always had a soft spot for him. This makes Percy especially angry and says that Annabeth will do just fine. Percy and Thalia then decide to get some sleep. In Percy's dream, he dreams of Poseidon's palace, and the battle is getting even worse. But he does see that Tyson is now leading his own army, with a battle cry of peanut butter. The dream then shifts to Ethan Nakamura, who is with Kronos' army at Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium in New Jersey. Ethan has just been summoned to talk to Kronos. Kronos asks how his mission went, and Ethan does not think Percy will ever surrender. Kronos then asks what happened on the Williamsburg Bridge, but Ethan says he doesn't know. He does not reveal Percy's weak point to Kronos. Kronos does not believe him, but drops the subject when Kronos winces in pain. For a split second, Luke's voice can be heard. Ethan asks if Luke is still fighting inside, and Kronos says this is ridiculous and dismisses the subject. Kronos then tells the army to get their surprise ready and attack Central Park. The scene then shifts to Camp Half-Blood, a vision of the past. Chiron is welcoming Hermes, May Castellan, and baby Luke to Camp Half-Blood. May wants to become the new Oracle of Delphi, as the current one has been dead for 20 years. Hermes is hesitant about this, but May believes it's her calling. Percy understands what's about to happen, but he can't do anything about it. When the Oracle of Delphi tries to possess May, she goes crazy. No one knew about the curse that Hades placed on the Oracle. Percy then wakes up to Annabeth standing over him. Percy says she should be resting, but Annabeth says she's good as new and that Percy needs her. They then head for the attack on Central Park. Percy splits his remaining forces up, sending some to the bridges and tunnels and the remaining to Central Park with him. At Central Park, they engage in battle and soon realize that Kronos' army is being led by Hyperion, a titan who is just as bad as Atlas. Percy engages him and holds his own with the power of the river around him, but soon Hyperion gets the upper hand. Percy then challenges all of his power and summons a hurricane, keeping the titan trapped and unable to break free. Grover then uses his reed pipes to grow vines and a tree, trapping the titan inside. All seems to be going well until a giant flying pig attacks. Percy says he will handle the pig and for everyone else to deal with the remaining army. Percy then hops on Blackjack to go fight the flying pig. Percy then gets an idea when he sees a statue of Hermes. He takes a rope and attaches one end to the statue and the other end to the flying pig. Using Plan 23, he activates the Hermes automaton and also a bunch of lion automatons and tells them to fight the giant flying pig. With their power, they're able to turn the pig to dust. Percy then heads back to help his friends fight, and he does a sweep of the war zones and he realizes that things are not looking good. Kronos' army is backing them up towards the Empire State Building, aka Mount Olympus. Percy lands near Annabeth, and for the next hour, the two fight back to back in a blur, but their efforts are in vain. Soon the remaining forces find themselves backed up to the Empire State Building. Annabeth tells everyone to retreat inside and hold the door at all costs, and even worse, they see Kronos riding down the street on his chariot. But when all seems lost, Chiron shows up with backup, the Party Ponies. With the help of the Party Ponies, they manage to push Kronos and his army back for the time being. They haven't won, but they have bought themselves some time, so everyone regroups in the Empire State Building. But with good news always comes bad news, and the gods are quickly losing their fight against Typhon. Dionysus and Hephaestus are out of the battle, and Typhon will arrive in New York City tomorrow. Percy and Annabeth then talk about Luke, and Percy tells her how there might still be some of Luke alive inside Kronos. Annabeth finds this hopeful as she still believes that Luke can be redeemed. Percy then goes to check on the wounded, but he somehow ends up in a bar with Dionysus, or at least his consciousness did. Dionysus pulled him there to tell him that if Mount Olympus falls and the gods are destroyed, the very fabric of time and reality will start to unravel. Percy says if this is the case, why don't the gods come back and help them? But Dionysus says the gods are too proud to ever admit to needing Half-Blood's help, and that Half-Bloods need to want to help the gods on their own for it to mean anything. Dionysus also tells Percy that Kronos is not at his full power, but in a day's time he'll burn away the body of Luke and assume his true form and be 10 times more powerful. Dionysus then sends Percy back to Manhattan. Percy is just about to explain to Annabeth what he saw when he sees his stepfather's Prius on the street. Percy rushes over, and inside is Sally and Paul asleep. So with the help of Annabeth and Chiron, they safely push the car to the side of the street. Once the car is safely pushed aside, Percy hears something, a helicopter. A helicopter belonging to Rachel Elizabeth Dare is coming towards them, and they realize the pilot must have fallen asleep. Surprisingly, it's Annabeth who sprints into action. Her and Percy hop on Guido, a Pegasus, and race off to save Rachel. They manage to get close, but Guido's wing gets caught in the propeller, and he plummets to the ground. Annabeth does manage to jump off and grab the edge of the helicopter. Percy manages to calm Guido and safely glide him to the ground, and Annabeth miraculously is able to land the helicopter safely. Rachel tells Annabeth thanks, but she just shrugs it off and storms away. Rachel apologizes, but Percy just asks what's the message she wanted to tell him. Rachel wants to know how Percy knew she had a message, but Percy just says dreams and demigod stuff. Rachel rambles a bit about visions she's been having that don't make much sense, but she does tell Percy that she saw a message that said, "Perseus, you are not the hero." Percy is a little offended that Rachel came all this way just to tell Percy that he's not the hero. Chiron then comes over and introduces himself to Rachel. Percy asks if Chiron can help Rachel decode her vision, and Chiron and Rachel leave to go talk. Percy decides to get some rest and once again dreams of the underworld, where Nico is desperately trying to get Hades to come up and fight in the war. The dream then shifts to Kronos' army, who is getting ready to once again attack, but this time with a Draken. Percy then wakes up and tries to get his forces ready, but realizes that they've dwindled. Rachel reveals that she had a vision about the type of Draken they'll be facing, a monster that can only be killed by a child of Ares, something they happen to be in short supply of. Annabeth realizes that the spy must still be reporting to Kronos, as Kronos knew this would be a monster they would not be able to defeat. But with nothing much else they can do, they go to face the Draken. Annabeth goes invisible and Percy hops on Mrs. O'Leary, but nothing they do is having an effect. Just when all hope seems lost, Clarice comes charging into battle, leading her cabin mates. Clarice manages to poke out the Draken's eye, and then Percy and everyone go to give her backup. But Percy realizes something. When he looks into Clarice's eyes beneath her helmet, they are blue, and Clarice doesn't have blue eyes. But before Percy can talk to her about it, the Draken spits acid on Clarice and she collapses to the ground. Annabeth rushes over to her, but then a flying chariot zooms into the battle, carrying Chris Rodriguez and the real Clarice. The real Clarice is filled with rage and kills the Draken. After the beast is dead, everyone goes to the dying imposter, who is really Selena Beauregard. Selena couldn't convince Clarice to come fight, so she stole Clarice's armor and pretended to be her, as she knew Cabin 5 would only listen to Clarice. Selena says she had to do something, as Charlie Beckendorf's death was her fault. That's when Percy puts it together. Selena is the spy. At first she did it because Luke was nice to her, but eventually she wanted to stop. But Luke wouldn't let her. Luke threatened to tell. Luke promised her she was saving lives, but Luke lied. And then Charlie Beckendorf died. Clarice calls her a hero, and then Selena passes away, hopefully reunited with Beckendorf. Clarice finally decides to fight with them to honor Selena and receives the blessing of Ares, and she absolutely lays waste to the monster army. Percy then sends Mrs. O'Leary on a mission and goes up to Olympus to set up last-minute defenses. When Annabeth and Percy get to the throne room, they see that Rachel's there and she's holding Pandora's jar, the one that Prometheus gave to Percy. Percy takes the jar and introduces Rachel to Hestia. Rachel sits at Hestia's hearth, and Hestia tells her that she needs to let go of all distractions. Rachel will soon need to make a choice. Percy then gives Pandora's jar to Hestia as an offering, saying that hope survives best at the heart. Percy then heads to his father's thrones with plans of sitting on it to gain Poseidon's attention. Annabeth says this is risky as gods do not like people sitting on their thrones, but Percy says he has to take the risk. The plan works, and Percy tells Poseidon of a plan that he has. Poseidon says if he follows this plan, his palace will be destroyed. Percy says that Olympus is his real home and is more important. Poseidon is not sure at first, but finally agrees to Percy's plan. When Percy returns to Annabeth, a scout tells them that Kronos is once again marching on Mount Olympus. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover get back to the street and things are not good. Hunters and half-bloods litter the street dead and injured, and Clarice has been frozen. The only thing standing between them and Kronos now was Chiron. If you remember, Chiron is Kronos' son. Chiron confronts Kronos on Luke and tells Kronos that Luke was a hero and Kronos corrupted him. For just a brief second, Kronos says, "You never cared about me," as if Luke was speaking. In response, Kronos sends Chiron flying into a building. Annabeth in rage attacks Kronos, but it does nothing. Once again, when all hope seems lost, Nico comes to the rescue, leading an undead army with Hades, Demeter, and Persephone on their side. Kronos, needing to conserve his energy, collapses the enchantments on New York City, and the mortals start to wake up. Sally and Paul spot Percy and head over to him. Percy is worried that Kronos will attack them, but Kronos just ignores them and heads into the Empire State Building. Nico assures Percy that he'll handle the army and keep his parents safe, so Percy, Grover, and Annabeth race after Kronos. When they get to Olympus, they see the bridge is crumbling. The connection to Olympus is fading. Percy follows the path of destruction to Kronos, who is laying waste to minor gods and Olympus as a whole. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover find Kronos and Ethan Nakamura in the throne room. Percy and Kronos fight while Annabeth takes on Ethan and Grover plays some helpful tunes. Annabeth, suddenly realizing something about the prophecy, tries to reason with Luke, hoping he's still inside Kronos. It doesn't work and Kronos sends Annabeth flying across the room. Percy is unable to get to her without turning his back on the enemy, so Grover tries to make his way to her. Kronos tells Ethan to finish off Percy as he knows that Ethan knows his weak point. Percy then once again tries to plead with Ethan. He says that this isn't the balance that his mother Nemesis would want. Kronos only destroys. Yes, the minor gods deserve to be honored, but not like this. Ethan then strikes, but not at Percy, at Kronos. But it does nothing, and Kronos opens a fissure in the ground, sending Ethan plummeting below. With the distraction, though, Grover is able to get to Annabeth, and Grover gives her some ambrosia. Percy tries to fight Kronos, but Kronos says it's too late. Kronos then brings up an image of Jersey. Typhon has arrived and the gods are no closer to stopping him. But then something miraculous happens. The Hudson River explodes and Poseidon and his army, led by Tyson, erupt from the river. With their help, they are able to bind and seal Typhon. Kronos is outraged, and Percy says he's lost. The gods will now be on their way back to Mount Olympus, but Kronos refuses to back down. Kronos goes to strike Percy, but Annabeth stops the blow with her dagger, once again pleading with Luke. Annabeth says that she knows Luke is holding back Kronos even now because Luke promised to protect her and keep her safe, a promise that he once made on this very dagger. This causes Kronos to stumble, but it's not Kronos anymore, it's Luke. Annabeth, unable to hold her dagger anymore with her broken arm, drops it and pleads with Percy to give it to Luke. Percy at first refuses. But now it's Luke who pleads with Percy, saying he won't be able to hold Kronos back for much longer. Percy then understands what Rachel said to Percy. Percy isn't the hero in the prophecy, Luke is. Hero's soul, cursed blade shall reap. The dagger, now a cursed blade after Luke broke his promise, and Luke's soul, it all makes sense. Percy hands the dagger to Luke, a decision that would either save or destroy Olympus, just like the prophecy said. And Luke stabs his weak point, and Kronos is destroyed, but now Luke is also dying. Annabeth assures Luke that he was a hero and he will die a hero. Grover tries to heal him, but Luke says it's okay and tells Grover that he's the bravest satyr that Luke has ever met. Luke asks Annabeth if she loves him, and Annabeth says at one point she thought she did, but Luke is more like a brother to her. Luke accepts this and then asks Percy to not let what happened to him ever happen again. Make sure the gods take responsibility for their children and all the underappreciated gods and goddesses. Percy says he will. When the gods join them, Luke is dead and Percy wants to have a proper service. The three fates then come to take Luke's body, and Percy realizes something. The string that he saw the fates cut all those years ago before he even knew he was a half-blood wasn't his own soul, it was Luke's. Before Luke is taken away, Hermes comes and kisses his son on the forehead. Apollo then comes and heals Annabeth and Percy. Percy then asks Zeus if he could make the top of the Empire State Building blue, a symbol to tell his mom that he is okay and the war is finally over. The gods start repairs and everyone tends to the wounded, and miraculously Chiron is okay and Nico and Hades are received as heroes. However, Rachel has disappeared. Percy and Grover have a moment where Percy tells Grover that the nature spirits that died did not die in vain, and they can replant them and come back even stronger. Percy then has a moment with Tyson where they are both glad they are not dead, and finally Poseidon comes over and gives Percy a hug, telling him how proud he is of his son. The gods then hold a council. Zeus thanks everyone, especially Poseidon and Hades, and awards Tyson as general of the Olympus army, and as per Tyson's request, grants him a new weapon of a stick. Annabeth has been put in charge of redesigning Olympus, and Percy shall be granted any wish he wants. The gods say that shall Percy wish to become a god and immortal, it shall be done. Percy thinks about staying young and fit forever, but then he looks over at Annabeth, and she kinda looks like he did 3 years ago when Percy thought she was going to become a hunter of Artemis. And Percy finds that he doesn't want to become a god. But what he wants instead is for the gods to take responsibility for their children. No more unclaimed demigods. And he wants the minor gods to have proper representation here in Olympus and at Camp Half-Blood. And especially Hades. He should finally be given a cabin at camp, and Nico should be accepted. The gods are very hesitant, but agree. As Percy and Annabeth are leaving, they run into Hermes, who says New York is shaken, but for the most part, everything should be okay. Percy then apologizes to Hermes for calling him a bad father. Hermes knew Luke would be a hero in the end, but could not interfere with fate no matter how much he wanted to. Hermes also reveals that while Percy did defeat Kronos, he is still very much alive. And Percy asks about the other Titans, but Hermes says for the time being, they'll go into hiding. Percy then assures Hermes that Luke did love him and not to make the same mistakes with his other remaining children. Hermes then tells Percy that perhaps the gods will learn a thing or two from Percy, and then Hermes leaves. Percy is also confronted by Athena, who tells Percy that perhaps she was wrong about him and that she knows Percy's true motives for staying mortal. Motives that have a lot to do with her daughter Annabeth. Athena leaves Percy with a warning not to mess things up. Percy then reunites with Annabeth and the two leave Olympus together. Once in the lobby, Percy sees his mother going crazy, trying to get up to Mount Olympus. But when she sees Percy, she calms down and crushes him in a hug, just glad that he's okay. But their reunion is cut short when Nico comes over to tell them that Rachel stole Blackjack and is headed for Camp Half-Blood, a place where mortals can't go. So Annabeth, Nico, and Percy race after her as they think she will never get through the defenses and may end up dead. Also, Percy isn't too happy that she stole his Pegasus. They get to the river and Percy calls some old friends, the Hippocampi, and they race for Long Island Sound. When they get to camp, Rachel is somehow already at the big house. When Percy goes to talk to her, Chiron says not to interrupt. And in fact, Chiron was the person who invited her here. Percy then realizes what's about to happen when he sees Apollo, the god of prophecies. Rachel wants to become the new Oracle of Delphi. Percy tries to stop her, remembering what happened to May Castellan, but Rachel says it's okay now. It seems Hades' curse has been lifted. And all goes okay. It seems Hades' curse has been lifted and Apollo introduces Rachel as his new oracle. But things do not stay peaceful for long as Rachel sprouts another great prophecy. 7 half-bloods shall answer the call. To storm or fire, the world must fall. An oath to keep with the final breath, and foes bear arms to the doors of death. I wonder if this prophecy will become important and, I don't know, spawn a whole other series. But right now, back to this story. Apollo says that Rachel needs rest, but first Rachel says goodbye to Percy. Rachel now being an oracle means she must stay a maiden for life and can't have romantic interests. So essentially she dumps Percy, even though they were never really dating in the first place. Percy then goes back to camp where campers are slowly trickling in. Funerals are had and the wounded are tended to. That night, Annabeth brings Percy a cake. He's completely forgotten that it's his birthday. Percy then, in the most awkward Percy way possible, tries to tell Annabeth how much she means to him, to which she laughs at. And Percy mentions how she's not making this easy, and Annabeth responds that she's never going to make things easy for him. And the two kiss, finally together. However, they're interrupted by Clarice and the camp chanting, "It's about time." They then pick up the pair and throw them into the canoe lake. But Percy just creates a bubble for them down there, and they share another kiss. Things from there go back to normal at camp, and Grover is put in charge of the satyrs, and they're super busy as they're scouting more demigods than ever. It seems the gods are keeping their promise to finally claim their kids. Constructions on new cabins have started at camp, including a cabin for Hades. Percy also gets a visit from Poseidon, who thanks Percy for all he's done. Soon, camp comes to an end, and Percy and Annabeth go to see Rachel off. Annabeth and Rachel have actually now become pretty good friends, considering they don't have to fight over Percy anymore. Annabeth will be going to boarding school in the city so she can be close to Olympus for her remodeling job and maybe also stay close to Percy. Annabeth mentions how she's worried about the great prophecy, but Percy says they'll cross that bridge when they get there. Besides, it wouldn't be Camp Half-Blood if it was peaceful, right? Right. How right you are, Percy. It just seems demigods can't leave peaceful lives. Well, that wraps up Percy Jackson and the Olympians, but not Percy's story. Up next, the Heroes of Olympus, The Lost Hero. But for right now, let me know which book so far is your favorite down in the comments below. And until next time, Half-Bloods, I'll be signing off. So please, always remember to stay safe.